Hey everyone, it says we're live. Welcome to the Conversations That Matter podcast. I'm your host, John Harris. Sorry we're a little fashionably late. As many of you know, I have been experimenting with different programs to see what's the best option for live broadcasts. And I finally ditched Zoom today, which means that I had to find another program. And I know actually Eric, who's joining me today, Eric Muldrow, he uses StreamYard. And I know a few other brothers have used it. And so I decided I would use it, and this is the maiden voyage. So uh, I had to get used to some things, but so far it's working really well. So anyway, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for everyone who's here to participate. And we already got, man, the live chat is buzzing. We're streaming
Nice.
on Facebook, we're streaming on YouTube, and we're going to talk about what happened. Well, it didn't happen yesterday, but the video was released yesterday in Memphis. And we're going to talk about the reaction from some progressive evangelicals. So people who they name the name of Christ, but they have a different view than I do and Eric does on this issue. So I know Eric's been on the podcast before. Eric, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, John.
My pleasure.
Especially reciprocating me having you on my own just recently. But yeah, I'm a retired police officer, retired law enforcement, I like to say, because my career expanded is broader than simply just being a cop. My law enforcement career started in 1990, the end of 1992 after I got out of the U.S. Army, where I started working for the Westville Correctional Center in Westville, Indiana, maximum security prison. I worked there for about a little over 3 years. In 1996, me and my family moved out, or we moved out to Vegas in 1995. I hired on with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. For the first 10 years, I worked as a corrections officer in the county jail here. And then in 2006, I decided I just wanted to change. So I went to the Patrol Academy and I finished out my career as a police officer. During that time, I did various things. I was a defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor, active shooter, response instructor. I was a gang intelligence officer. I was a gang response officer. Um, I've done a bunch of different things. I mean, it kind of gets to be a blur after a while, but I retired in 2014. 2018, I decided to start Code Red Conversations. When I saw so much, there was such a hotly contested debate as to police uses of force and whether the police are constantly abusing their power or not. And I just said, man, you know what? I got a pretty broad base of knowledge in this area. And then as a born again believer, by the grace of God, I was like, I need to start speaking out into these issues and just giving people a different perspective, not just from the, all cops are bad, or even that every cop does good. I wanted to offer a balanced approach from somebody who not only was in law enforcement, but actually spent time training cops and saw the flaws and saw the problems and actually spoke out against it. So fast forward, here we are right now, man, and we're discussing this tragic incident that took place in Memphis.
Well, you're certainly a veteran. You have the credentials to and experience to speak to this issue in a very authoritative and knowledgeable way. And that's why I wanted you to be the one talking about it. And you've been talking about it all day, from what I understand. So you were on the radio, I know, just before you hopped on this podcast. And I saw earlier today you were live streaming your own thoughts on this. And so we're not going to play any video. But I know you did. And I want to start there if possible. What actually happened? Because I'm so unclear about that. I mean, I've seen some of these clips, but as far as motive, as far as, what was even the justification for stopping this guy, from start to finish, what's the scenario?
Well, the breakdown, which is questionable, if you want to believe what the officers involved, and that's another unfortunate, result of this is that, the perspective of the officers, and in this case, I'm saying it's justified, but just overall, at times, people will look at officers with a more questionable eye. But these officers made the allegation that they stopped him because he was driving recklessly. They claimed that he was driving on the wrong side of the road. They went to stop him and he was swerving, almost hit one of the police officers' vehicles unmarked vehicles. They weren't clear black and white vehicles. They were unmarked because they work in a unit called Scorpion, which is like a organized crime, and they deal with. It sounds it from what I read, the little bit I read about their section they worked in was that it's like they deal with like a high level crime and more violent offenders. So that was the basis. The alleged basis for the stop was that this individual was driving erratically and that they needed to make a stop and so that he wouldn't hurt anyone.
Okay. So how did it get to what happened? I mean, how does it go from what you just described to, I mean, he's dead, but
Yeah.
brutally beaten, and I mean, I just this makes the George Floyd situation look like nothing.
Yeah, honestly, this was a savage, brutal beating. There's no other way of putting it. A heinous, evil act, evil actions. And if you watch the video, because there are 4 separate video clips from 4 different perspectives. And if you watch the video, these officers respond, their response to this guy. Now I can understand if, let's say it's true that this guy actually almost hit them. You can understand how somebody would be pretty irate over that. Like if we're driving
Right.
down the road and someone almost hits us, you're going to be pretty wound up about it. But these
Right.
officers get out of their vehicles and they're screaming. You got 3, 4, 5 officers all yelling at this guy, telling him what to do, which is problematic in and of itself because it's difficult to hear clear instructions. We're typically taught in police work that one person communicates, one person, so that the suspect, subject, citizen knows what we want them to do. So they're effing him, F-bomb and this, get the bleep off on the ground, this and that. They finally they grab him out, pull him out of the car, bring him to the ground, and then they're telling him, and he's kind of like, okay, all right, like, all right, I'm doing what you're telling me to do. And even then, he's being somewhat apprehensive, which is, in all honesty, understandable when you got these guys just going off on you. And then, and instead of they're telling him to go face down on the ground, and he's like, I'm on the ground, but he's not face down. My thoughts are, okay, if I want this guy to go face down on the ground and he's not complying, I'm going to put him face down on the ground. That doesn't mean I'm going to slam him. Doesn't mean I'm going to slam his face to the concrete. I'm just going to apply my weight to his body to get him where I need to be so that I can pat him down, conduct a proper pat search, make sure he doesn't have any weapons or any contraband on him. And then I'm going to handcuff him, secure him, and then I'm going to go about with the rest of my investigation on this matter. None of that went on. They're yelling, screaming. As soon as next thing you know, you see a taser pulled out. Next thing you know, you see pepper spray. They're spraying the guy in the face. It was just a total mess. And then he gets up and he runs off. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead, but he gets off and he gets up and then he runs off. And then what happened after at the next scene when they finally find him, that's where it was already bad enough at the initial scene. But then once he took off running, that's when things got
Is that the video
horrendous.
it looks like it's from like a house security camera or something? That's the second time they find him and that's what they do to him?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't clear on it either. I looked at the 4 different videos and I didn't know how they were pieced together. This situation, people have known about it in Memphis for months. This has been, brewing, and the footage obviously was just released yesterday, but people I know there were saying this is going to be a big problem when this is released. And so these officers,
I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, yeah.
I was under the impression that this incident took place just a few weeks ago. Was it January 7th when this initially took place, or? I mean, I could be wrong, but I thought it was like January 7th when the incident first took
well,
place.
it may be. They've been pretty quick about it, I think. And
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you about that, if police departments are changing how fast they release stuff, because I know civil rights attorneys saw the footage. The family was offered to see the footage. I mean, all of this has happened before it went public.
Right.
But the officers, they were fired and they should have been. But what motivated them? I mean, there's all kinds of things floating around out there. Someone told me they thought it was he had cheated on one of the officers' wives, and this was
I heard that.
payback, and right. And so, do we even know?
I think when situations like this go down, there's always a lot of speculation. There's always a lot of people assuming they know the details. I recall years ago, it might have been in 2004, 2005, here in Las Vegas. There was an incident where a police officer went into a house and he got gunned down by the suspect who was barricading himself with, and he shot the officer, killed him with an AK. And then one of
Oh,
the
wow.
quickest rumors that we heard was that, oh, the rumor had it that the officer was sleeping with this guy's wife and this and that.
Right.
So the best bet is, as the proverbs, like, just to be more patient. The one that pleads his case first seems right. Until the other comes and examines him. Let's sit back and let's wait until we get more information in regarding to the minute details, what
Okay.
motivated him. But I want to say this though. I would say that the motivation to me, apart from those details, like what went down, it seemed to me that there is a clear culture within this unit. I can't speak for the entirety of the Memphis Police Department, but it came across to me as if it was like the movie Training Day or like the Rampart Division in LA. For those who are familiar, that's where the movie Training Day was based off of. Was that there was this rogue unit of undercover police officers who basically did whatever they wanted to do. They stole money from suspects. They framed people. They planted evidence on innocent people, and it was just like a racket inside the LA Police Department. And the impression excuse me, the impression I get, of course, not knowing all the details, but just having seen people who are used to abusing their power, it seems as if there was a pattern that had developed, that these individuals were used to getting away with the things that they did because they were all out in the street corner. Dude was throwing punches, just whooping this guy and hitting him with the baton, kicking him in the head. It seems as if they got away. The fact that they dealt with, and I spoke about this on the radio show I just did. I think that the fact Memphis has one of the highest crime rates in the nation. And I'm under the impression that considering who they dealt with, the level of offender that they dealt with, they somehow justified these heinous acts in their own mind. We're keeping the streets safe. That's what we're doing. You guys don't know what we have to deal with out on these streets. So they were able to make it seem like it was all good.
So, you know, the fear I think some people have, and this is an understandable fear. We'll get to the social justice stuff in a minute. Is that if the police in Memphis, this unit can do this, how long have they been doing this? Is this they just happen to be caught, but they've done it other times? And one of the things someone told me, and I'm sure you've looked into it more, is that 4 of the 5 men involved in this brutal beating were new hires.
Mhm.
Is that correct? That these mostly were new guys on the force?
Yeah, there are a lot of guys that were young, 24 years old. It hired on in 2017, 2020. So there are a lot of guys there. When you look at the grand scheme over 5 years on in law enforcement isn't a long time. There's still a lot you have to learn. And yeah, there were a lot of guys on there who were very young or very inexperienced in law enforcement. And the thing that concerns me in that I have a perspective on it, and not a lot of people agree with me necessarily. But knowing how cliquish any field can be, but law enforcement, like the military, can really develop a lot of cliques. And you're dealing with such volatile situations. You need maturity. You need people who are prepared to deal with the stresses of the job. And one of those stresses can be or could be speaking out on real legitimate injustices when they do occur. And there are some people who may not be able or willing to speak up when they see bad things happening out of fear of being ostracized. Unfortunately, that's a very real thing. And yeah, so you had a lot of young dudes on this department, and I think that might have played a role in this entire situation.
I have a question for you. There's the chat is lighting up, and I'm going to show you one of the people say my microphone's too low. So that's one of the, I don't know how do I adjust this in StreamYard. I'm going to work on that, guys. But
Yeah, it sounds pretty
um,
crisp over here from my
does it?
perspective, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Maybe
going to
because you're talking lower because you
I
can't
am
really.
talking lower than I normally do, and there's a reason for it. At my house, there's something else is happening right now that I need to try to be quiet for. So most of the time, I don't have those constraints. But anyway, I'll work on that. Eric, why don't you respond to this? Because this is going to come from this is the opposite side, and I have seen I think
Okay.
one or two other comments like this from Greg Shirk, who I guess he's probably not listening anymore. Greg, I hope you're still there. But he said he lost me. And I don't know if he's talking about you or me. When he began to excuse the criminal was at fault. If he obeyed the lawful orders, none of this would have escalated. I'll skip this interview now. I think so many of us are tired of what's taken place, especially since 2020. But the Ferguson effect has really just made us all want to side with the police, no matter what. Sometimes because we just know that we've been lied to so many times. Could you address this? Because there's a certain logic to this. If he just would have complied, none of this would have happened. At the same time, these officers though seem to be extremely inexperienced, as you say, and they handled this very poorly. And who's more at fault? I guess would be the question. Or is it a combination? Is it 60-40? Is it you know?
Well, we didn't go there because the conversation didn't start there.
Right.
So that's why I didn't address that point. I mean, I really, I don't mean to insult the person who wrote that question, but if you want to know what I think about that, ask and don't just assume and then bounce out. That's kind of silly, in my perspective. But anyway, I've made it. If anyone who's familiar with my channel, Code Red Conversations, I've made. I can't even say how many videos I've made where I discuss that particular issue. I'm currently working on a book and a course that addresses how citizens can deal with police interactions safely. And one of the continual themes that points I seek to make, is the necessity, the utter requirement for the individual to comply. In all actuality, I can't put a specific number on it because I haven't done the actual research, but you think of almost every famous police-related use of force that you can think of. George Floyd, Jacob Blake, Rayshard Brooks, this one even, in the vast majority of them, had the individual complied with the police officer's commands, they would still be alive today. Alton Sterling, I can go on and on.
Right.
So there's no question that plays a role. The question is, okay, let's just say the suspect didn't or chose not to comply. Then we have to look at the totality of the circumstances. What happened next? What did the suspect do? And were the officers, the level of force that the officer used, was it justified? Even if that individual didn't comply, was it comparable to the amount of force? What he did, the fact that he took off and run, did that mean that the police officer was justified in using deadly force? I would hope that this individual who asked that question would be wise enough to say, no. That's the point I'm making right now. He should have complied. Absolutely. No argument from me. But does that necessarily justify the officers to do whatever that they want to do? I hope that they wouldn't say that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, my just initial thought seeing the video was, I mean, I don't know what the guy did, but no matter, what it was, once they had him, I don't know why they had to then go the extra step. He was already, he wasn't a threat to them anymore. They could have taken him in. Well, let's, unless there's something else you want to share, let's get to some of these reactions. Are you ready for that?
Let me just add this real quick.
Please do.
It's the perspective of when he's no longer a threat. And I tell people this all the time. And I made this case earlier on my video the live I made for my channel. The amount of force that the officer needs to bring. It's not minimal force, it's the necessary force. So if I bring a knife to a situation, the officer isn't required to pull out a knife too, like old 60s movies where they have a knife fight, like the old Michael Jackson Beat It video where they're tied to the wrist and they're having a knife fight. No, it's a deadly force encounter. The officer brings the necessary amount of force to bring the situation down and to gain control over it. Once Tyre was handcuffed, which it appears like it was, and once they got to the video where it's over where like at the light pole or whatever, once it got to the situation to where he was handcuffed, it looked like they're still beating this guy up. They stood him up. They're throwing punches at him. All the time they're yelling at him to get on the ground. But then at one point, he's not giving them their hand, they say. They stand the guy up. At least that's what I think. They stand the guy up. It looks like his hands are, if he's not cuffed, at the very least, his hands are, they're controlling him. And this one officer is just taking, like his best shot, like hitting a heavy bag on this guy. That's when things get excessive. And then as it goes on, you hear his speech continue to get slurred, which shows that punch drunk, there's some type of trauma going on with his brain where he can't speak. And then 3 days later, the guy's dead. All I'm trying to say is I'm pro-police. I'm a former cop. I think I can speak on these issues better than the vast majority of people. And we need to understand that, especially if we're professing to be Christian, that doesn't give anybody free reign to do whatever that they want to do. If cops are out there doing things that they got no business doing, which can ultimately lead to someone dying.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The force did not fit the situation. They weren't threatened there, and I think that was the first thing that jumped out at me. Let's, if you're ready for this, Eric, we will go to some of these reactions because everyone has an opinion, right? And because I've focused the last few years a lot on these social justice minded people in Christianity that are trying to push the needle left, I went to a few different Twitter profiles, right? And I always regret every time I go on Twitter. I'm like, why did I come here? But
right,
you have to go there sometimes to get what people are thinking. And there was two things that were interesting. The first thing to me was, and maybe you have an opinion on this, the big wigs, right? So like David Platt, I don't know, J.D. Greer, Matt Chandler, et cetera, right? The guys who have been very active in kind of knee-jerk jumping to conclusions in previous incidents had nothing to say, at least initially. And I thought that was very interesting to me. Yeah, and I think something's changing. I think they know that that's not a winning move maybe anymore. I don't know, but like,
or it could be the fact that the cops were black. That could have played a role.
Which we haven't even mentioned yet, but now we'll get into that.
All 5 of them black.
All 5 of them were black, and I think the police chief is also a black woman, right? Black female.
Yes, and which brings to mind it's the conversation you and I had when I had you on asking about social justice. It brings it to mind. The attack I see, and we're going to see some of that from some of the content that we're going to discuss, is the structural perspective, the institutional perspective. But I'll let you do your thing, bro.
No, absolutely. So that's, and I would say, to sum up everything we're about to see, that you just said it well. They take a very systemic, institutional, structural approach that this, it wasn't just 5 guys beating up a criminal or an innocent person, I guess as the case may be in their minds. It was what inevitably happens when you have police, because in America, I guess, because police in America it's a racist system. So it doesn't matter how black you are, you join that system and you're complicit. So let's just go through a few of these, because these guys, I want to make a separation. These guys are the hardcore, like, progressive evangelical, dyed in the wool woke, and not to be confused with what I think the opportunists or people who have gone woke but are now trying to course correct. Like these guys, these guys I think have swallowed the whole thing, at least enough of it, as much as you can, while operating in evangelical Christianity. And here's some of the tweets. So I don't even know where to start. Let's start with Duke Kwon. Duke Kwon, I believe PCA pastor, if I'm not mistaken. He's written a few books, and he says this once again: anti-Black racism is more than conscious personal prejudice. It describes rather a cultural order that subordinates Black humanhood and renders Black life inherently criminal, violable, and dispensable. Be not mistaken, Tyre Nichols' murder was created by racism.
Mm.
So what? I mean, and I have a few other. Let me read one more from him. He says this: Tyre Nichols was 100% lynched. Where's the lynch mob? At home, perhaps gazing at the spectacle on their phones. Be careful not to get unknowingly drawn in, beloved. So you have two groups here. You have um, racism killing Tyre Nichols, and then you have those of us who, I guess this would be you too, Eric. I don't know. People who watch this, we're part of a lynch mob if we watched any of this.
I'm sure he watched it as well, but
yeah,
he's got the right mentality.
It is a weird thing though. I've seen this knee jerk like, don't watch it, and I, the same people. I'm like, dude, what about all the raunchy movies? I don't know. Anyway, there's a sacredness to this. It's holy ground. It's a saint has died. There's something that they treat this differently. But how do you react to that though? That number one, this is racism that killed him, and then number two, any of us who are watching it are part of a lynch mob. It's crazy to me, but people believe this.
Yeah, my thoughts would be, how does, and this is the question that I would ask Duke over there. I would say, so are we to assume, I mean, there would be a couple of questions. Are we to assume that all forms of violence is, against some ethnic minority is racially motivated? Like all forms of it? Like before America was around, were Black people not killing themselves? Were we not killing each other in various parts of the world? Were other ethnic groups, were Indians in India not doing harm to one another before the white man showed up? Were natives here in the U.S. or even where they came prior, were they doing harm to one another before the colonizers showed up? And if we know anything about history, you can't help but say, yes, it happened. So what's your argument there? Like their argument is so limited. Once you get outside of the U.S., it seems like this argument just falls apart. Once you get past slavery or colonization in different countries, it seems like these arguments just collapse. So it's like the only reason or the only response for this evil act is racism. To me, that's just so ignorant. That's just so silly. That's such a weak, baseless argument, but it works in our modern society where everybody believes that everything negative done is racially motivated. Heck, I even heard somebody just a couple of days ago talking about climate change. I think it was Jane Fonda. Climate change wouldn't be an issue if it wasn't for racism or something like that. I might have gotten it mixed up, but I'm just like, how ridiculous is this? They link it to everything. And I think oftentimes it's done, and you can correct me on this one here, but I think oftentimes it's done because it stirs up emotion. You link this issue with racism, you get the Black vote or you get the Hispanic vote. You link it with racism. Therefore, everything is racially motivated.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think of what Jesus said about where evil originates from. It's from within, it's not from without. And whenever these systemic things come up, it seems like some of that responsibility is taken away. Because I guess the question I have is, okay, let's say it's racism that's killing these people. What do you do then? And it's like, it would seem like if all the cops are Black, if the police chief is Black, I'm like, well, where's the racism? Locate it for me then. Show me, because that's the excuse before, is that, well, that's a white person. Derek Chauvin is white, and obviously that means it's racist. But you don't have that here. So locate it for me. Show me where it is. And they never really do. It's just there. We're just supposed to assume this. That's not Christian, guys. That's not remotely biblical. We believe that there were 5 men with evil hearts. Now,
thank you.
I do want to ask you, though, about whether or not, I don't know if you've done any research on the Memphis Police Department, though, were there defects in their training or in just the conditions that, um, we'll say it doesn't take away the evil heart, but at least made this moment more possible, that gave the evil heart an outlet that it would not normally have, perhaps, even a few years ago. And I'm wondering if good men were let go because of COVID mandates, or if, I mean, and I know they have a huge hiring problem. They're down hundreds of officers. Are they just taking anyone off the street who, have they lowered standards? Do you know anything about that?
You know what? I honestly can't say. I can't speak to that 100%. But if I can speak on a more national level, I know it's more difficult to find qualified police candidates in and of itself. I remember there was a time when I first came out to Las Vegas and was testing for Las Vegas Metro Police. And under that umbrella, corrections officer and police officer are all under the umbrella of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And when I tested for CO and I went to get in line just to pick up my application, there were probably a few hundred people in line. And then when I went to take the written exam, the line literally stretched. It was like a half a mile long to take the written exam. And I was just like, man, there's no way I'm going to get hired. I almost didn't go, but my wife was like, Eric, you got to try, give it a shot. So I ended up testing, and somehow I managed to test really well. But now you fast forward that to 2021. I mean, we're talking about 1996 when I first hired on. And now you fast forward to 2022, 2023, they struggle to find qualified candidates pretty much in every police department around the country. There's been such a quote unquote good job done by those who are anti-police to disparage the name of law enforcement. And some of that is, to be honest, there's a good portion of that can be blamed by bad police actions. No question about it. I'm not going to act like cops just sit around and just, and do nothing but good, and everything that they do, like Lucky Charms comes, out of their mouths and, whatever. But, keep it clean for TV and whatnot. But, but I would say the biggest issue is the fact that the culture, our society has villainized law enforcement to such a degree to where if you have an agency that already, if you look at Memphis, I'm not sure what the ratio is ethnically when it comes to law enforcement in Memphis, but if you say a unit that has 5 Black officers and the police chief is Black, and just from what I do know, there's a pretty large Black population in Memphis. Generally speaking, a cop is more likely, or a citizen is more likely to test for corrections officer than they are for police officer. I would say because it's more culturally acceptable. When on the streets, you feel like you're oppressing the man, like the man is keeping the Black man down. So there's more of that cultural issue that you have to deal with in law enforcement. So I would say that, and then you couple everything that's happened over the last few years to really vilify law enforcement, you're going to have more and more people who are less likely to test. So in order to fill in gaps, I can almost guarantee you, like I said, almost, because I don't know 100%, but I can almost guarantee you that to some degree, there's been a lowering of standards in order to fill quotas and try to keep the streets safe, which in turn ultimately only makes the streets more dangerous because you put unqualified people out to do the job.
Yeah. That was a good point. What do you think about this, the lynch mob accusation that if you're watching it, if you see a video, I mean, I don't know, that's just so silly. I don't even know if it needs a response. But
now, see, on the one side, if you don't watch it and you want to remain ignorant to it, you'll get criticized by a lot of these activists, the woke types. They'll say, well, you don't care. But then on the flip side, if you do watch it, they'll criticize you because you're saying it's like this lynch mob activity. Right. It's like you drive down the street and you see an accident on the side of the road. There's a natural tendency for people to want to look. They've been hyping this thing up for weeks, talking about how heinous it is. Who isn't going to want to see what went down? Like, was it really that bad? And the vast majority, I would say all of the response I've seen has been negative. People speaking out saying what these cops did was terrible. So watching it, why is that a bad thing?
What's funny to me is if they didn't release it, I think the accusation would have been they're trying to cover something up, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so, there's Dwight McKissic, another he's in the Southern Baptist Convention, but I would say a woke pastor. He retweeted someone this morning who makes a comparison. He says, in black and white, when white police officers murder African Americans, no justice. Black cop murders a black man, instantly is arrested. Tyre Nichols. And so I've seen these comparisons before with other things where they'll say, look, there's obviously racism present here because these black officers were let go so quickly. But in another situation where you had white officers, it took longer. So you the same, and that was an incident from 2019. So obviously pre-2020. And so, this means that every step of the way they were just they're being quicker now because they're motivated by the fact that these are black police officers. And
no, I think I don't mean to cut you off, bro, but I just think that's just a lot of nonsense. We look at the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin incident. How quick was that response to have him where those guys were fired and they were subsequently arrested and charged? That was relatively quick. Nationwide, there was typically a policy to wait before you put out information. But seeing as how there's been such a push for people to get data, know what's going on, because before you didn't have to worry necessarily about a riot kicking in because people get this information. Nowadays, with this seems to be ever growing woke culture, police officers, agencies are more likely to put this information out there to keep people with the hopes that people will be calm. There have been too many situations. I could think of one that took place in Wisconsin, probably around 2016 or so, 2015, where there was a shooting and there was rioting in the streets that night because the rumor had it that a white police officer shot an unarmed black man and they were rioting in the streets. That's the one, if anyone's familiar, you or your audience, where they showed a video of the black girl saying, "Don't bring the violence here. Please don't do it here." But then CNN cut out the part where it said, "Take that ish over to the suburbs, burn they blank down," like telling them to bring the violence to the white neighborhood. But CNN had carefully spliced it to where it was just her saying, "Don't bring the violence here." But lo and behold, once the information came out, what did we find out? Black officer shoots a black man who was armed with a gun. Rioting all night in the streets with little information. But once the information came out, it's like, oh, okay, well, my bad. Like, what do you do with that? So now you have agencies who are more likely to say, okay, let's get the facts out. Let's investigate this as quickly as possible and get this information out there so that the public can know what's going on. They can know what we're trying to do to prevent more and more situations like this from happening. And so I think it's more of a response to everything that's going on in our society.
Yeah. It's interesting the incidences they'll pick to compare. So, I mean, the situation that they're comparing to, I think took place in Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken, with Ronald Green. It's a different state, completely different department, different time period. It's pre-2020 when that the whole thing took place. And, when you detect a pattern, you have to, I learned this in historical research, right? If you're going to make an argument and it's predicated on a pattern that you detect, you better make sure that pattern exists.
Right.
So test it over and over in many cases. And you can't just take two random cases, right? And that's what I think is happening here. And the sad part to me, though, is that someone like Dwight McKissic falls for this and uses it to forward a narrative that there's no evidence for.
Well, let me say this, man, and I'm just going to keep it real with you as a black man here in the United States for 52 going on 53 years. In the black community, all somebody has to do, and of course, this isn't 100%. I'm not saying that this is every black person, but it is very effective to throw the allegation that so-and-so is racist. You are automatically vilified, ostracized, and you are public enemy number one, just with the accusation. And it is more prevalent today in our current society. And I keep saying that over and over again because it was always an issue as long as I can remember. But nowadays, all you have to do is make that accusation. Why is it that you hear the Democrats constantly calling the Republicans racist?
It works.
As it works, it works so effectively. The accusation of racism shuts off any communication. I'm not going to listen to anything else you have to say because I was told by this person, that person over there, their mama, their uncle, their cousin, this reporter said that this person is racist. They're not good. Why would they make that up? They must be telling the truth. And I used to think this exact same way. I used to have this mindset that if a white person did something against me, it had to be because that they were racist towards me. And that was partially due to the fact that I dealt with so much racism growing up. I dealt with so much, it really jacked my head up. And then I got out of certain bubbles, New Jersey, terribly racist at the time, lived in Indiana, ridiculously racist. And this was even into the mid 90s. But when I was in South Carolina, didn't deal with racism ever. When I lived in Arkansas, never had anyone look at me sideways as far as racism. Like the South, like radically shifted as far as my personal experience. And I know we're not, I don't want to just focus on anecdotal situations. But man, my main point is when it comes down to issues of race, it is so effective to make that allegation. And you'll have people who are just, oh, okay, it's got to be true. And they're going to just continue to do it. And it works for the Black community because, because of history. Because of history. And, some people just assume that it's still as bad as it was in the freaking 1800s.
Yeah. Well, and it does seem to just be an assumption. There's nothing behind it. If you have to go so far as to compare two totally apples to pears, two totally different incidences, to make your argument work, and then to make a generalization, and then again, the question all of us Christians should be asking is, where's the evil then? Is it there a law somewhere that someone passed? Is it the police commissioner? They can never tell you where. It's just there.
Right.
So let's look at some of these other ridiculous things that were said. Some of these we may have already, they're all kind of the same strain, but Jemar Tisby says the systemic part in systemic racism means that anyone who participates in that system, whatever their demographic, background, or socio-cultural location, can participate and be complicit in the racism of that system. It's structural, not just attitudinal. Tyre Nichols. So, making the same point as Kwon, that these Black men were just racists.
Well, it goes back to what you just said. Okay, well, show me, demonstrate to me the racism involved in this and how it can only be that and how it can't be anything else. Show me that. Lay it out clearly to me how this was racially motivated. I guarantee you he wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, if they went to the training, let's say, right, how these officers were trained, and in the training, they were told, if you arrest a white man, don't do anything, be careful of that. But if you arrest a Black man, go ahead, do whatever you want, right?
Let me tell you something, man.
You and I would both say, well, okay, you have a point, Jemar, but that video cannot be produced. If anything, you're going to find it's probably the pressure is the opposite.
And especially in today's society where these issues are brought up and you have people working for various corporations and governmental entities where they deal with situations like this and they're there to talk about it, you ain't gonna find some policy like that. You just aren't. And I guarantee you that on a department that has a high percentage of Black folks working for it, people ain't gonna fly with that if they say, hey, leave the white man alone, just arrest and pull over all the Black people. Yeah, you ain't gonna hear that. If that was really going down, you would hear a public outcry on levels that you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe if that was really going on. That outcry would be all over the media, all over mainstream. It would be everywhere. They would be producing receipts, recordings, something along those lines, because it wouldn't just be in a bubble. Now we know bad things can happen in a bubble, and you may not be able to record every situation. But if that was really the mindset, it would be known. It would be a very, like I said, they would all know it. So that's my question is, apart from the fact that I always say that we have to look at everything from the totality. We're taught that in law enforcement, and just speaking in general, we have to look at everything from a totality circumstance. Is it that more Black people are arrested? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, more Black people are arrested in Memphis. Okay, well, what are they doing that's causing them to be arrested? Or are they being framed? Of course, you want to ask that question. That could be a reality, especially with this section, this Scorpion division that these guys were involved in. And that's another thing. I guarantee you that almost everything that they've done prior is going to be questioned. Every case that they've dealt with is going to be questioned.
It would be, the question you asked would be hard, I think, to test in Memphis, wouldn't it? Because Memphis isn't it like 85% Black? So
it's something pretty high. I can't quote the numbers right offhand, but
so most of the altercations,
you have to, whether Memphis is a good example or not, or whatever city we're talking about, whichever location we're discussing, I think it's best to say, okay, well, what were the actions of the suspect? Period. That is where you start, and that is where you end. What did they do? And then, was there someone else who did the same thing who didn't look like them? If you want to have a little bit of
apples,
okay, did they get off, or were they treated the same way? If this person is slinging crack on the street corner, what's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
Are they going to be arrested, regardless of whether they're Black, white, Hispanic, or whatever? We have to look at these issues. And a lot of people stop as soon as they see the skin color. They stop asking questions, and it's like it's encouraged not to answer or ask further questions.
There's a gentleman asking a question, I think, Eric, that would be good for you to, because it reminded me of something you just said. He says, it's Jose Velarde. He says, how much do you think that the propaganda related to Black men being hunted down by police influences Black men to resist arrest?
Oh, I think it's massive.
So do you think in this situation that the suspect, taking off, I mean, and we can't get in his head, but
yeah,
I mean,
of course.
Is there a higher incidence of that kind of thing happening, trying to escape the police? Because, I've been told the media tells me they're going to do something to me.
Right. Yeah. Here's a good example. A few years ago, I think it was in 2015 or so, I went to this Legacy conference in Chicago. And Legacy was like a Christian rappers get together, and they would bring in sound. Back then, they brought in sound theological teachers. Paul Washer spoke there. I think even John MacArthur spoke there at one point. This was before all of this, the Freddie Gray incidents and all these issues that really started dividing culture, ultimately started dividing the church. But when I went, it was like when wokeness was really starting to creep into the Legacy conference, because you had a lot of reformed rappers like Lecrae would be there. I think Shy Lynn, people like that were there. Cross Movement. For those who are familiar with the Christian rap culture, a lot of these guys were there. But they started bringing in people. And there was one point, the point I'm trying to make is there was a young man who got up. They had a poetry slam competition. And this young man got up there and he was talking about how he's raising up his son, and he's saying his poem about he's worries about his son being stopped by the police, and the guy's up there crying, and he's just going in, and I'm sitting up there looking at this guy like totally unemotional. If any emotion I was feeling was kind of anger or disappointment, because I'm like, this young man is sitting up here rapping about something that he really truly doesn't have to fear when you look at it from a grander perspective. But he's rapping and crying, holding his son, talking about how he fears for his son's life if he gets pulled over and stopped by a police officer. When in all actuality, situations like that are extremely, extremely rare encounters. When you talk about the hundreds of millions of police contacts that the police make on an annual basis, the very small percentage of people who end up dead or even hurt or harmed who come in contact with the police is very, very small. But when you have a society that has from every area of media, whether it's your news media, Hollywood, sports, entertainment, your music, when everyone is telling you that you can't trust the police. Back in the day when I was in the Army, it was not public enemy, it was NWA with F the police. So you have this cultural mindset that you can't trust the police, and you hear it over and over and over and over again. And the only situations where you see someone gunned down is on CNN or ABC, NBC, CBS, or MSNBC, is when you see a Black man shot by a police officer. Then you start to believe, unless you're discerning enough to say, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't this. Let me do my own research and let me find out what's really going down. But it has been so successful to convince people that if a cop pulls me over, that I'm better suited to run and get away as opposed to comply and do what I'm told to do.
Yeah. No, good points there. Mika Edmondson is another, I would say, woke evangelical voice. And he said this about the incident. He said, racialized systems can set marginalized people up as instruments to enact injustice against members of their own people group. See the stories of Matthew and Zacchaeus, the tax collectors, for examples. When people of color see this happen, it adds an additional layer of trauma. So what he's saying here, Eric, it sounds to me like he's saying, look, he's assuming it's a systemically racist system to join the police, and when you join it as a Black man, or I guess a minority, it's very similar to Zacchaeus becoming a tax collector and then pilfering from his own people. He's profiting off of abusing, right? So that's what he's saying is those officers, the reason that they found it advantageous, I guess, or that they did what they did to be a police officer and to go beat people up in their case, was because that's what they were told to do. The thing, well, let me ask you first. What do you think the difference is? Because I want to talk about that a little bit, because I've heard this argument made before between Zacchaeus, tax collectors. I mean, do you detect a difference there between that situation and then minorities joining a police force? Because I mean, I do. Tax collectors, there weren't laws regulating what they did that was evil. They were following a pattern that was wrong. And in this case, though, I mean, these 5 police officers, I don't know if Mika Edmondson forgets this, Zacchaeus wasn't fired. These 5 guys were.
Right. And charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, oppression, under color of law. They're looking at some serious time. These guys are looking at. They're being punished for system. They're being punished for their actions.
So this whole systemic abuse, I mean, they challenged the system. They went against the system, and the system is now crushing them. Because
there are laws that have been put in place to this was a conversation I had on the previous radio interview I just did, where somebody was saying cops can basically do whatever they want to do and not get punished. And I said, that's garbage. That's nonsense. I said, there's been a continual pattern of harsher and harsher sentences and greater laws and limits placed on police powers over the decades. It's clear. Good example is in New York back in the 70s, there were hundreds of police shootings. Hundreds of police shootings. The last I checked, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2020, LAPD, and this is when New York probably had maybe there were a few million less people living in the state of New York. They had hundreds of shootings. Fast forward to 2020, 2019 or so, there were 26 shootings. I'm talking about shootings in general.
Wow.
And how does that happen? Oh, did people decide to get good? No, there were laws that were placed laws and policies on local agencies that said, okay, this is when you can use deadly force. Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. People need to look up those federal cases if they're not familiar with those, that impose restrictions on when any amount of force can be used and when deadly force can be utilized. So
Mhm.
this idea that the system is just openly racist, just like you said, John, the system, they violated the rules of the system and they're being punished as a result.
Mhm.
When a lot of these claims that sound good to some on the outside are really examined, they fall apart. They completely fall
Yeah.
apart.
How about one more, if we can? This is from, uh, well, Reverend Benjamin Kramer. I'm not sure who he is, but I know who Samuel Perry is. He's one of these. He writes books on against Christian nationalism in his mind, and the religious right, and all these kinds of things. Um, and so some people might know who he is, but anyway, he comments on something that Reverend Benjamin Kramer says, and what he says is, when people are literally dying from mass shootings and police brutality in our country, but our culture just hears the loudest voices in Christianity protesting drag queens and books, we can't expect people to believe our religion has anything to do with life conquering death. And Samuel Perry says, well said, this is indeed the situation. Now, um, I'll give my reaction first, I guess, Eric, and then I want to hear what you have to say. But when they're comparing this, they're saying, and this, by the way, this tweet was got a lot of likes, and I'm sure a lot more now, went viral.
Right.
When Reverend Benjamin Kramer is comparing these two things, police shootings or people being killed in the street, police brutality, to drag queen story hour, there's a huge difference. There's probably a number of differences, but the first one that comes to mind for me is that drag queen story hour is institutionally protected. And in some places, it is actually celebrated with our tax dollars. Public libraries are doing this. So you have what we're paying for in our communities going to something that God hates, that's sinful, right? In the case of police brutality, when that's also sinful and wrong, but there's no justification given. It's not like these institutions are saying, everyone come on down to the police station and we're going to have a good lynching this afternoon.
Right.
We're gonna no trial by jury. We're just going to kill someone because we want to do it and for your entertainment. Well, then he might have a point, but it's obvious that there is no institutional support for any of those things. Those things happen as a tragedy of being in a sin-filled world, but they're not. Our tax money isn't paying for the celebration of those things, and that's a totally different. Well, what's your thought on that, though? Are Christians hypocrites if they complain about drag queen story hour, but they don't say enough against police brutality?
I think in some circumstances, some situations, there might be a debate on what actually is police brutality.
That's a good point.
Yeah, somebody might say that, there are people who had different perspectives on the George Floyd incident. There are people who had different perspective. Take was it Rayshard? I get my situations mixed up. Was Rayshard Brooks, was that the one what was the one that was in where the guy got up and walked to his car and he had a knife in his hand. And he got shot in the back. I'm just getting my situations because I'm thinking.
I don't think that was. I don't. Someone.
Because I'm thinking Rayshard Brooks. Rayshard Brooks might have been the one that was in Atlanta where the guy was pulled over for a DUI, or he was asleep at the wheel, and it was.
I just looked it up. Rayshard Brooks is in Atlanta. Was in Atlanta in 2020.
But I'm just drawing a blank. Forgive me, y'all. But all I'm saying is that, okay, let's take Rayshard Brooks for instance. There were people. The fact that the guy started fighting the police when they went to arrest him. He got up, grabbed the taser from the officer, took off running, turned around while he was running, tried to shoot the officer with the taser. The officer shot him and killed him. Mm-hmm. There are people who would argue that that was an unjustified shooting of the police, by the police. But there are other people like that was completely justified, because what happens if the officer got hit with the taser, he was incapacitated, and then Brooks comes over and wanted to do whatever he wanted to do to him. So you have to kind of decipher what they're talking about, what they're arguing when it comes to a police brutality. If it's something that, go ahead.
They're telling me Jacob Blake was the guy that you
Jacob
were
Blake,
of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's some people who argued for weeks and months that the Jacob Blake was unarmed and he was unjustly shot by the police until later on, more video footage came out. Then he did an interview on ABC, I think it was Good Morning America, where he openly admitted that he had a knife. He was fighting the police. He dropped the knife, picked it up, and started to walk back towards the front of his car. But initially, everybody thought that was completely unjustified shooting until more information came out. There are too many people who want to make the comparison between the two. And then I'll say this. Unjustly make say, well, one's justified, one, and they argue over that. And I'm like, well, let's look at the facts. But I'll say this, when it comes down to dealing with the issues of the drag queen, story hour, and all this kind of stuff, who's to say you can't argue about both? You have to,
Right.
you have to choose a side. You have to sit up here and say that sexual immorality is okay, but this right here, we need to put all of our, we need to put all of our focus on this one police shooting.
I think what they're saying is that we're hypocrites, Christians. I think that's what he's saying. Christians are hypocrites because these are both things that God hates, but you only care about one of them. And
I think that's silly. And I don't think there's any true basis for that, because the vast majority of people spoke out about the George Floyd case and vilified it immediately. The vast majority of people are speaking out against this situation that we're talking about right now. So
it's a straw man. Then you're saying he's just making up boogeymen that aren't there.
It sounds good. The fact that that there's some of us who don't assume that every time a police officer shoots somebody that it must be some form of police brutality. The fact that we try to nuance and we try to make a separation, we try to look at details, that doesn't make us hypocritical. These people get on my nerves, honestly.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Lord. Forgive me.
I haven't done a lot of research on Memphis and what I know, just because of some family connections, that the crime rate is really bad and it's gotten bad over the last few years. And I think the Ferguson effect has affected a lot of communities.
No doubt.
I know, though, they were one of the woke, the first cities, I think, to actively start taking down their historical monuments. And I think they even exhumed a grave, and which tells me they have a woke mayor, they have woke leadership, right? It's a Democrat-run city. And, none of that seems to have helped them get away from an accusation of racism when something like this comes up. That's ironic to me. It doesn't matter what you do, how much you do, that charge is still gonna be leveled at you somehow if an incident like this takes place. And it didn't make anyone safer, right, to implement those policies. So
now I wonder, my thoughts are, real quick, I wonder, I'm trying to look it up real quick to see if the Memphis police defunded the police.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder I wonder if they actually did anything like that. I'm scrolling through trying to see whether anything like, say again?
If they slash their budget.
Yeah, because then that would be another issue that like I said, of course, none of us are sitting up there justifying what these officers did. Because, man, I'm telling you, the radio show I was on, every person who was on the left, they came on trying to act as if I was justifying what these officers did. I said multiple times that in no way. My thing was, one of the guys was making a claim that we need to have George Bush, we need to have Joe Biden come up with a new law and sign a bill limiting these police officers' actions, because there's no law to limit what they do. And I said, that's a lie. I said, that is just a bold-faced lie. And then as a conversation, when I destroyed that argument that he was making, then he was trying to say I was trying to justify what the police did. I said, why are you sitting up here yelling, talking about I'm trying to justify what the police officers did? The first thing out of my mouth was how heinous it was. And I just spent 2 hours on my own show talking about how bad it was. I said, you're wasting your time talking about this. Then another guy comes on the show and does the exact same thing. And I'm like, and then I had to go. And I was like really upset, because I was like, man, I can't even defend myself, really. But I don't know. I don't even know how I got there. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. And I'm not finding anything that's jumping out. There seems to be conflicting things. It looks like there was a councilman that in 2020 was trying to get slash the budget, but I think their budget's actually gone up if smartcitymemphis.com. I'm looking at it. Police got bigger share of city's budget in Memphis in 2020. So I'm not sure, what to make of that, but
Yeah, I mean, it depends on when that took place. Was that before,
yeah,
before the whole George Floyd incident? Was it after? I mean, who knows? Maybe they just never were defunded, but
I know they implemented a policy of they could hire outside of Memphis, and they were trying to broaden. That was in 2021, and I knew that they were trying to offer incentives to get people to become police officers. One of them, I had read in an article, was they were trying to recruit kids when they were like 16 or 17 instead of 18.
oh, that's when you have to start. That you
Yeah.
have to start younger. You have to. I remember I was on the Black Police Officer Recruitment Council here in Las Vegas, and they were saying, "Yeah, we want to go to the high schools," and I said, messed up right there. You need to start younger. I said because there's a culture in in a lot of black communities that you ain't trying to be a cop. Even if you want to be a cop, you ain't going to tell anybody because you're trying to be the man. You're trying to, you're trying to, because police officers hold black folks down. I said you need to
Right.
start with these kids when they're in grade school and start to work their way through and develop a mindset. One, to stay out of trouble, and two, to say, you know what, police aren't that bad, and to be proud of that. And I said it
Yeah.
needs to be something that you need to start with early because if you hit high school, odds are you ain't going to win them.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know specifically. I have some friends in Memphis, and maybe I'll talk to them about it some more. But sad situation, and be praying for
Very.
the family. Be praying for Memphis, and just for our country, because we are in a bad way. I hope this was helpful for everyone, just to talk through some of these issues. And if you want to find out more about Eric, where should I send them? The CodeRedConversations.com.
Yeah, yeah, CodeRedConversations.com. That's my website, but primarily I'm most active on YouTube at Code Red Conversations and on my Facebook, my personal Facebook, Eric L. Muldrow. Just put an L there in between my name, Eric L. Muldrow, and my Code Red Conversations on Facebook and on Instagram. That's where you'll see me being the most active.
Cool, cool. Well, hey, Eric, I appreciate you giving me an hour of your time. I know you have a lot going on, and you need to go rest. You've been talking about this probably too much today.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
my voice is hanging in there, so I'm doing pretty good.
Okay, all right. So, hey, God bless, man, and thank you once again.
Oh, thank you, bro. Thanks for the
Uh,
opportunity.